Good. Well, we're going to just go ahead and get started. My name is Susan Sikakwaptiwa, and I work for the federally recognized tribal extension program. It's part of the UA Cooperative Extension system, and I'm based up in the northern Arizona on the Hopi tribe. And we work a lot with extension specialists from the rest of the cooperative extension to bring education on a variety of different topics. So I am going to turn it over to Miss Betsy Greene. She is the equine extension specialist for U of A. And so she's the one that's going to be teaching us tonight. And so I'm going to turn it over to Betsy.
All right. So tonight we're going to do some basics on horse nutrition and also hay quality. So why your horses eat what they eat, and also how you can pick some great hay quality for your horses when you have the options. And so do you guys buy it in your hay or grow your hay? First of all, do you grow or buy it? You buy it.
I buy it.
You buy it? Okay. And do you guys buy it in large quantities or just go to the feed store and get a truckload and then go from there?
We board, they buy it out there.
Okay. How about you, Keith?
More recently, we've been having to buy large quantities. We also been having to feed our cattle too. So
yeah,
the biggest that we've purchased recently was, I think, about 200 bale.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So when you get large quantities, if you have the opportunity to purchase that or your barn where you board the horses to, then a lot of times you can get some pretty good consistency and quality. And that can be important for the horse for some of the reasons we'll talk about first when we're talking about the horse nutrition and the horse gut. Okay. So that's actually my horse sticking his lip out. Probably, I don't know what I put, if I put a cookie on there or something he didn't like. So he's just making a face. That's Roper, and is just nickname because he was an old roping horse. But he's my little Roni pony. But so when we talk about horses and talk about how they're built, anytime that you've had, like, maybe somebody bought a bicycle or some really difficult toy for a holiday or a birthday or Christmas or some other thing, and the parents trying to put it together and follow directions late at night. Sometimes I think that's what happened with the horse. Like, he was one of the last things to be put together, because when I talk about how his system, his gastrointestinal tract is built, then you might say, I'll tell you how some of the things aren't the best. They could have been in better order, but they are what they are. So that's how we deal with it. And one of the things we'll talk about next time will be colic. And part of those things you'll learn here why colic can happen a lot in horses. So first of all, horses are non-ruminant herbivores. Okay, so herbivore means they're not meat eaters. Okay, they eat grass, pasture, hay. They're not meat eaters, although sometimes when they're trying to bite you, you think, wait a minute, maybe they are, but no, they don't. So the non-ruminant, a ruminant would be like the cattle, where they have stomachs that they actually have 4 stomachs at the beginning of their, or what we call stomachs, at the beginning of their digestive tract. And there's the rumen, the omasum, the abomasum, and one other one, reticulum. And my dog is now going to go chase sprinklers because I didn't close the outside door. Let me go close this door. Just one sec. That's what happens when you have a Jack Russell puppy. So my sprinklers may spray wild ways next time they spray. So anyway, that cow, when they eat their food, or the cattle, when they eat their food, they can eat it and then they just lay down and they ruminate, and then they belch it back up, chew it some more, and then they just lay down, and they have all these bugs that are actually good bugs in their stomach, the big stomach, the rumen, and this is very simplistic, And that can actually help them break down the food so that when it goes further down their digestive tract, it's actually kind of like somebody was in there doing some of the work for them, and they can get better use of their food. So if you think of it, have you guys ever heard the fact that you can feed cattle moldy hay, but don't ever feed your horse moldy hay? So I got a nod yes and a nod no. And so that's because the horse, it just goes straight to the stomach. And once it goes in, it goes all the way through. But the cow, because they have this rumen right at the beginning of the digestive tract, those microbes or the good bugs can actually help break that stuff down, and it doesn't harm the cattle near like it does the horse. So that's why the hay quality is really important. But so they actually have a rumen, but it's kind of behind the rest of the track. And that's where somebody wasn't reading directions right when they put them together. So, but we'll get into that. And so they have their microbes in what's called the hindgut, and they can do some of that work after the fact, but it's not nearly as efficient or effective as the cow. And so if you look, horses are normally grazing. Okay, they're if they were just given the choice living in the wild, and our wild horses or our feral horses or whatever, they just graze. They graze up to 20 hours a day, and then they just rest. They eat small meals, usually kind of medium quality stuff, and move on. Now, today's horses, especially in our boarding situation, most of the time you're feeding them hay and or grain. You're actually working them. You may be riding them. In this case, it sounds like you're breeding them too. So different world from the a la natural, the horses eating on their own. And so this little picture on the right, you guys can see my mouse, right? See my mouse? Yeah, okay. So this is kind of we'll go through this in more detail, but the mouth, and then they chew the feed, and then it goes down the esophagus, which we have one you can feel, and then into this small stomach, and then into the small intestine. We'll go over this. The cecum, which is kind of rolled up so you can see it, which is the parallel to the cattle's rumen, then the large intestine, and then out into the stall or the field. So let's look a little closer. Okay, so first of all, in our situation, hay is the basic forage. You want the hay to be the majority, hay or pasture or other types of hay feeds that we'll show you. That's what they're grazing animals. They were built to graze small amounts over large time. And that's one reason their stomach is so small. We'll show you how small in a minute. They use fiber as a major source of energy. And that hay, in this case, that looks like alfalfa, actually provides good nutrients. And it can be the basis of the diet. So you start with hay and then you add what you need. So let's go back to the digestive system here. This is a picture of a horse's skull. And the horses have incisors, and some other time we can show you how to age a horse by looking at their front teeth here. They have potential little wolf teeth. They have premolars and they have molars. And so these are the grinding parts. So when you have hay, when you have grain, they chew side to side. You've ever seen, it looks like they are not chewing up and down. They're chewing like in a figure 8 direction. And that's because they're grinding all that hay and feed so that it's the first breakdown, or it's mechanical breakdown of the feed so that they can get more out of it. Because the more broken down that feed is, the better they can digest it and get the nutrients out of it. So the incisors, where they grab it from the field. And if you've ever fed your horse, maybe your horse had some soreness or lameness and you had to feed it some bute or butazolidin in the feed, and you crunch it up and you mix it up real good. then you feed that horse that bute and the feed. And when you come back, it's like there's this little pile of the bute dust because they've eaten everything around it. Because their lips are very, very good at getting even one little pellet. They're called prehensile. And so they're very good at picking up feed. So, and then grinding it. Now, as the horse gets older, they can actually wear down their teeth, and they may or may not be as good at grinding. And if they're not as good at grinding, they might not digest it as well. So that's where digestion begins, mechanical breakdown. So when you look, this is Booker. He's a half draft horse and he loves his treats. Usually that's just a treat. And he has lips that look like a battleship that open up. And I've done, not TikTok, what's the thing that you can do the short thing and it's just like he goes, ba-ba, ba-ba. So he can be your party entertainment too. So, but you can look at his incisors right there and his tongue and the treat, but you can't see his molars back here. The actual grinding happens with that. But he has loose lips, so he will sink ships. But so they bite off the grass, they grind the forage, and then they reduce the particle size. Like I said, they want it to be small enough so that they can have the best option of getting the chemicals in their stomach to break it down even further. So then you go, here's the mouth, then you have the esophagus down here, which goes to the stomach. Okay, and these would be the lungs back in here, and here's the heart, just so you know. So the stomach's further back than you would think. And so what happens, the esophagus joins the mouth area to the stomach. It's very strong. If you think you can feel and grab yours, it's pretty strong. And if you feel the little ridges in it, when you swallow, it's like there's peristalsis. It goes down and pushes it down. And when it gets into the stomach, there's a real tight entrance to the stomach. And then that stomach, it goes in, and then that tight entrance closes. That's called the cardiac sphincter. And that's because it's on the side. If you look at this little picture, if I can find my mouse, there we go. Where it enters the stomach is the cardiac sphincter because it's on the cardiac side, okay? And that is very tight. So if you've ever heard that a horse can't throw up, that's why. Because the esophagus pushes it food down into the stomach, and then that cardiac sphincter kind of closes it back off. So if you ever have a horse that's having food particles come out of its esophagus, that's not good. That horse is really sick. Okay, so just starting off, there we go. So here we have, look at this. There's the esophagus cut off, but it goes into the cardiac sphincter and the food drops into the stomach. And then there's also a pyloric sphincter here that goes out the back door to the small intestine. But the stomach is only 8% of the entire capacity of the gastrointestinal tract. So it's only 2 to 4 gallons capacity. So it's very small for the size of the animal. And so that, because they're used to eating small meals over long periods of time. So that's why we sometimes have to manage according to their build, even though we're not used to that. So think about if you've ever heard a horse having ulcers, that's because you have stomach acid, and the horses do too. And if you look at this through this window, see how it's redder down there? That's like tougher type tissue in the stomach. And that's where the acid would be. And so this top whiter part is not as tough because that's where the food's going in. And the acid is down here breaking things down chemically. So mechanically in the mouth, chemically in the stomach. And so if we get too much acid, you look on the healthy stomach on the lower left picture, you can see that line. And then stomach ulcers, very painful for a horse. And that can be because they have too much acid, if they have too much stress. There can be all kinds of reasons for that. But that's why we want to make sure that we give them meals, not just one big meal. Okay. So that when it gets into the stomach, my child has come to the door. And she's probably very wet. When it gets into the stomach, it'll empty in about 10 hours and go into the small intestine. And chemical digestion begins in the stomach. Enzymes and acids are added, okay? And that's where it's being broken down here, and that goes out to the small intestine. So here's a big picture. So now, this is a drawing, obviously, but if you look at this, here's the esophagus, goes into the stomach. Now you see how small this stomach is relative to all the rest of this digestive tract. And so once it goes out of the stomach, it goes into the small intestine, which is 70 feet long. 70 feet long. Even in that full, well, it might not be quite that long yet, but that's a long, long thing. It has 3 sections, goes duodenum to the jejunum to the ileum, and don't worry, there won't be a test. But what happens here is it keeps breaking down more, but it also starts absorbing all the nutrients that have been broken down to this point. So the small intestine is so important because it further digests, but it also absorbs the good stuff, okay? The fats, the proteins, the starches, carbohydrates. And so once it makes it all the way through there, see how it goes to this, the cecum. That, which looks kind of like a, I don't know, a bad carrot, a weird carrot. That is a very large and very muscular thing that is parallel to the cow's rumen. And so that is the thing when somebody was putting the horse together real late at night, they should have put this cecum in front of that small intestine, and it would have been much better for the horse, because that cecum has the good bugs or the microbes in there, and it breaks down things even further. But you know, if you have moldy hay or something, some bad feed or something toxic, A, the horse can't throw up because I showed you the cardiac sphincter. B, the stuff that could break it down and process it is already past the majority of the digestion. So that's why the horses have to be really cared for and fed appropriately. So once it goes out of the cecum, it goes into the giant, large colon and the small colon, or the large intestine would be both of them. So goes out of the cecum, and water and some B vitamins that were broken down from the good bugs and other are still absorbed somewhat, but most of the absorption happens in the small intestine. Then it gets water, more water, and it gets smaller and smaller and tighter and tighter. And then this is right up under the tail, and it puts the manure balls onto the ground. Now there's a thing called peristalsis, which keeps food moving, just like in the esophagus, keeps pulsing it through. And so that's where if your horse gets something bad to eat, it has to go all the way through the horse's system. That's why we have so much trouble with colics. So here's a different view of it, a couple different views, okay? So teeth into the esophagus, into the stomach, into the 70 feet of small intestines, into the cecum, to the large colon, take some hairpin curves. And, you know, whether you're going up to Flagstaff or if you've ever driven in Boston or then you know those hairpin curves. And that's another place that we can talk about colic next time. And then down into the small colon where it ends up going out the rectum, the anus, and onto the ground. And then Piper gets to pick up a pitchfork, right? So now just to show you a picture here, and you can see in here the esophagus. And here we got the diaphragm, which is that band of muscle between your lungs and your digestive tract. got your liver, your kidney. Here's your small intestine. Here's the base of the cecum. It's all tucked in there and mushed in there. There's the cecum right here. Here's the large colon. And so it kind of takes a roller coaster ride through the horse's gut and then out to the floor. All right. So I'm going to give you some tips and then we're going to talk about this. And now that you've seen how the horse's digestive system works, always rule of thumb, feed good quality hay. Hey. Okay. She wants to come help. So always feed good quality hay. And now you know why, because the horse, this is Wheezy. Say bye-bye, Wheezy. Into her bag she goes. Because the horse can't throw up the feed. So if you eat something bad, your stomach feels horrible and I don't feel good, and you throw it up. And so it doesn't have to go through the whole system. And if you don't throw it up, sometimes you feel way worse for a lot longer. Same thing with the horse. So feed 1 pound of hay per day for every 100 pounds of body weight. So that's 1% minimum of their body weight in forage. And so that's just the very bare minimum just to keep their system going like it's been built to. So if your foal is 100 pounds, how much hay does she need to have per day, or he?
1 pound.
1 pound. So if your horse is the typical 1,000-pound horse, then how much hay does he or she need minimum? Very minimum. About 10 pounds. And so then usually a horse will eat around 1.5–2% of their body weight. And so that mare, because she's feeding her baby and herself, she could eat up to 3% of her body weight in hay and feed. So she might get 20 pounds of hay and 5 pounds of ration, grain ration or something like that, or 7 pounds. But that's because she's making her own body needs and making milk for her foal. So a lot of times you'll see a brood mare will be skinny and the foal looks fat and healthy. Mama will always try and take care of that baby, even to her own detriment. So that gives you a rule of thumb, and that can help you figure out how much you would need to buy when you're buying hay for your horses as well. If you have 5 1,000-pound horses, and you'll say, okay, we want to feed them about 2. So 5 horses times 1,000. It's hard to write with a mouse. Pounds equals 5,000 pounds of horses. Okay, so if we feed them 1% of their body weight per hay, then how much, or per day, how much would all of those horses using this whole weight need? If it was 1 horse, it would need what? 10 pounds, right? So 10 times 5.
50.
10 times 5 is 50, okay? So now we say they probably eat about 2%, so you double that. So you might need to buy at least 100 pounds of hay per day. So that's either potentially a bale and a half if it's a 3-string, or a bale if it's a 3-string, 2 bales if it's a 50-pound 2-string. So 100 pounds per day in hay. So how many per month? Times 30.
We have to do math, Betsy. You're making us do math.
3. I'm doing math for you. Is that 3,000? Is that right?
3,000. Yes.
Okay. How many pounds in a ton?
4,200?
2,000.
Oh, shoot.
You got a big ton. So that means you got to buy 1.5 tons of hay per month to feed those 5 horses. Kind of gives you some perspective. So again, I won't test you on this, but just understand that that helps you.
And that's roughly the amount that we've been having to feed our horses, about
Yeah.
a
Okay.
bale a day.
Yeah.
But I usually do a bale for roughly 3 of our horses, and then another bale for the other 3. So we have 6 horses in total. So we
Okay.
do about a bale a day for 3.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're doing the right thing. Now you know that your math is right. Okay. And so now that you've calculated how much you need, you know that you're providing the energy for most mature idle horses. If a horse is working really hard, if they're roping or rounding up or working hard or training for showing or rodeoing or whatever, they may need more than that. So that's okay. So one thing to think about, you want to feed by weight, not volume. Because you said, Piper, you guys feed your horses both alfalfa and Bermuda, right? So if you pick up a big flake of alfalfa, does that weigh the same or less than that flake of Bermuda? You know?
More.
The alfalfa weighs a lot more because it's a lot more solid and compact. So that's why a flake of alfalfa gives your horse a lot more weight than a flake of Bermuda. So you might be overfeeding the alfalfa or underfeeding the Bermuda. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why you feed by weight, not volume. And then, of course, if you can, don't have real dusty, finely ground feed stuff, but always offer plenty of good water and change your feeds. If you're going to change it gradually, because you saw how their whole gastrointestinal tract is kind of one-way system. If you give a shock to the system, you cause potential colic. So always do things gradually. So, okay, and then start a horse on feed slowly as well. Let's see if our writing erases. I'm going to have to erase my writing. Let me find my eraser. Okay, look at that. There goes the math. You can relax. Okay, so as I said, it's important, the most important part of the diet for all classes of horses, because that's how their system is used to. Now, oops, my slide moved. I want to show you there's a couple of different options. This is all hay right here on the right. Okay, this in this feed barrel is or wheelbarrow is alfalfa hay. This is alfalfa pellets. And this is actually mostly hay, but it also has supplemental nutrients in it. So you can have, and so you need to know that because the 2 buckets are very different. So you can have hay, Bermuda, alfalfa, some mix. Some people feed teff, and some people feed, you said you had some orchard, other types of feed that you don't see too much, fescue or rye or clover in Arizona. Mostly we see Bermuda, alfalfa, teff, and some orchard grass. Okay, but you can have cubes, pellets, complete pellets, and these things can actually work well for you as well. And in fact, our horses get 1 meal of hay per day and 1 meal of these complete pellets per day. And so it actually meets their needs, because I'll show you, I think it's in the next slide. There we go. So this is and I'm not giving any brand, but hay pellets versus complete pellets. So if you look at this thing again, this is a hay cube. There also can be hay pellets. So this is just straight dried hay. It would be the same exact nutritional value as this flake, only less moisture in there. But this pellet, look at here, we've got alfalfa hay, cracked corn, phosphoric acid, zinc, manganese, copper, cobalt, sodium selenite, potassium iodide, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin A. So this is the stuff that has the hay in there. It's alfalfa hay pellets with nutrition to go with it, okay? And I'll show you a couple of quick things later too. So just make sure you know what you're feeding, because the other one doesn't have nearly the vitamins and minerals that this complete horse pellet has. So types of forage, we already told you. Mostly you see things like orchard, Bermuda, teff, or alfalfa here in Arizona. But there are lots of different types depending on where you live, what your seasons are, okay? So quality comes to play. Species or variety can have a big difference in quality, both in nutrient value and also how it was put up and how it was harvested, when it was harvested. So how many of you guys have seen some really nice, soft, succulent looking hay that looks like, you grab a piece, it's fun to chew on, as opposed to the real stuff that got put up late and it's more like eating sticks. Okay, so that's the maturity and when it was, how old it was when it was harvested. And that can make a difference on how much nutrition was provided too. We also want to look at appearance and texture, color, odor, presence of foreign material, whether it's mold, weeds, pests, dirt, and then leafiness. If you've ever gone to alfalfa, to the hay barn, and you pick up alfalfa, and then you see on the bottom, you have all the little green, what they call shatter, all the leaves that have fallen off, and it makes like green kind of dust in the bottom. So that those leaves, if it's too old or too dry, actually, you lose the nutrition, the best nutrition on the ground in the dust, in the hay dust. So we'll look at some stuff here. Let's just look at this right here. So which one of these guys do you think you want to feed to your horse? First choice, just quick look.
Go ahead and unmute yourself and yell out.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute. Tell me which one you would choose first instinct.
The one on the right.
Okay, so we got one for the one on the right. Keith or Blake?
I would say the one on the right as well.
Okay. All right, and Blake's gonna stay silent. So Susan, which one are you gonna feed?
I would definitely choose the one on the right too in my screen, the green with all the leaves. It's very green.
Okay, so it's a little bit of a trick question. Of course, there's a trick question. And let's see, we got a chat here. Green, okay. So
for the more roughage.
Yeah, so the one on the right is clearly alfalfa. You can see it's got a lot of good leaves in there. And it is actually, the stems are more mature than the stems of this grass hay on the right. Looks like we got some brown in there, maybe a little bit, whether it's just been old or whether it was down before it got, but it's more tender than the alfalfa when you look at the maturity of the stems, but the leaves in here are good. Now, if this had been wet and you put your nose in it and you smell mold, you run away from this beautiful stuff and feed this grass hay that still has decent nutrients. Okay, so it can be a trick question because I had some hay samples. I had a bale of alfalfa that had gotten wet in the hayloft and kind of caramelized. It got hot and wet. Fortunately, it didn't blow up the barn or anything. But so I took a big chunk. I almost sawed like a piece off a flake. I had it analyzed for the nutrients, and it actually tested better than the good stuff, the good quality physical hay characteristics. But you wouldn't have fed that to your horse unless you wanted to kill your horse. But so that's the thing where you have to look at the physical characteristics as well as the chemical testing if you evaluate the actual nutrition in there. So that's a little bit of a trick question. We'll look at some other stuff. But so here's where I want to show you. This would be like looking at this hay on your left. Okay. And it's clearly, it looks like it's a 2-bale or 2-string, maybe 50-pound bale. There won't be a test, but remember all that stuff I read off from that bag? So here we have digestible energy, crude protein, lysine, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, Na or sodium, K, what's K? Potassium, chloride, copper, manganese, zinc, iodine, selenium, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E. That's all the stuff you need. So when you test the hay that we saw up on the left, and you get the chemical or the results back, you can see that it meets the digestive energy, DE. It exceeds the crude protein. Lysine is amino acid. That's good. Calcium and phosphorus, that's good. Magnesium, it's good. Oh, it's way short on sodium and chloride. Can anyone tell me what you would feed to fix that?
Salt lick?
Yeah, sodium chloride is salt. So here you can see that's why they say put a salt lick out, because a lot of grass hay does not have high sodium or chloride. There's a lot of potassium, but it falls under the 100%. So it would meet the 100%, meet the needs. And here, a lot of these vitamins and minerals are not fulfilled. And that's why, like the complete pellet that I showed you that my horse gets in the morning or at night, depending on when it's blowing like it was yesterday, the hay would have all blown away. So that, if you just feed something, or if you just get what they'll call a ration balancer, and I show you what happens. You add salt, like you just did, and you can get this is a ration balancer. If you add a salt lick, then that'll go up to 100%. If you add a ration balancer, those are made with the minerals that are often missed by the hay. So if your horse doesn't need a ton of grain, it just needs something to meet its needs, that would be a ration balancer. And there's lots of different brands, and it's usually like a cup or a pound a day per horse. And it can help your horse meet the needs of all these vitamins and minerals. So that just gives you an example of what, when you look at the evaluation in the lab, what your horse is getting and what they need. Okay, so when forage isn't enough, you can add commercial feeds, you can use grain-based concentrates, and it depends on what you get as to what's the value and the nutrition. So not all feeds are balanced and fortified like that, like I showed you there. But one of the easiest things I want to tell you, vitamin and mineral supplements or a ration balancer, that might be your easy answer if you're feeding hay as your main source of grain, and even pasture as your main source of horse nutrients. And so always look at the feed tags. But many times, most horses just need a little ration balancer to even things out. Now that broodmare or your working horses might need some others, and there's a lot of, we could do a whole nother talk on grains, but always start with your hay first. Okay, so let's just refresh. How do you evaluate your hay? Physical characteristics is usually what we use first. And if you're buying a bunch of hay in quantity, you can do a chemical analysis too, but that would be for another day. So first thing, smell. Does it smell fresh? Is there any musty, moldy, or dusty smell to it? Okay, is it too wet or is it too dry? That would be some of the physical characteristics that we would evaluate. Okay, so then color. Is all yellow hay bad? You know, if you buy a squeeze of alfalfa, the outer side bales look yellow, but when you open the flakes on them, usually there's just a yellow outer from a sun bleach, and it's still green inside, right? So not all yellow hay is bad. If it's been wet and then moldy or something, that's very bad. Is all green hay good? If it's wet and moldy, then no, absolutely not. Now, brown hay, that's getting a little, most of the time, there's less nutrient value in the brown hay. Now, if you're talking about the edge of a flake or something and it's not dusty, moldy, or mildewed, or doesn't have anything else, then that's probably going to be fine. It just won't add a lot of value, but it adds roughage. But if your bale is all the way brown or old or not good quality, okay, so that's the color. So we had the smell, the color, what cutting. Now in Vermont, when I was there, we could not even start cutting until after the 4th of July because we couldn't get into the fields because it was too muddy. And not so much a problem around here. You can have up to 8 cuttings in the fields down around Phoenix area. And, but that first cutting in Vermont was not a great cut because it had grown because they couldn't get to it. So it was much more mature, because they didn't cut it early because they couldn't get in the fields. But here, a lot of times the first cutting might have more weeds because it's the first time through and the weeds might have competed a little, or at the edge of the field, the bales at the edge of a field might have more weeds from whatever's growing. In Vermont, a lot of times the fields had forest on the other side of them. So there might be some weeds and things on those end rows of the field. But here, a lot of times it's watered and just straight alfalfa, and you have beautiful cutting all across the field. So level of maturity. If there's a high leaf to stem ratio, so think about that, leaf to stem. So if we go back and think about that picture where you could see a lot of alfalfa leaves, that was good. But if the stems were so much even more mature than they were, and the leaves had all crushed or broken off because they were too dry, then that would be just like eating some filler and not some real high quality. So leaf to stem ratio. And then what was the moisture content when it was put up? If it's too wet, you might have mold. If it's too dry, then it's not going to be as high quality nutrition. So
I have a question.
Sure.
When you say put up, is that
baled?
Baled?
Baled, yeah. Yeah. Baled and taken off the field. Okay, so other. Come on, there we go. What else do you have in your hay bale? If you have weeds, snakes, deer parts, trash, blister beetles are a problem in alfalfa, and blister beetles can be very toxic. And we actually wrote an article on blister beetles if you want to learn more about that from the website that Susan will give you. You can also have hay fleas or mites, but sometimes, around here, even when we bale in Kentucky and you go to, all the students, of course, got sent out to the fields, grab those 2-string bales and you're about to throw it up to the guy up on the hay truck. And then halfway out, there's this half of a snake that flips down, whether it's dead or alive. It's like, ah! Yeah. We don't want the snakes that are around here in our hay. But there can be stuff that can cause, if you have an animal or a deer part or a dead mouse or a dead rabbit or something like that, it can actually cause botulism. So don't ever, get rid of that bale. Don't use that. Okay. So additional contents, unwanted. So where is it grown? These things can all affect the quality. Where is it grown? What is the soil quality where it's grown? A lot of growing grounds in Arizona are short, low in selenium, also New Mexico area. And so you might know that you don't have enough selenium. But selenium is a weird thing because sometimes you can have too much. Most of the time here, you would not have enough. But the species of plant, like alfalfa, has a lot higher protein level than grass hay does. So you need to know those things. Stage of maturity, the pests, the weeds, all those different things can affect the quality of hay, physical characteristics. And then, like we said, harvesting, curing, handling, storage. If it's put up too wet or if it gets rained on, it can, especially if we have one of those gully washers like we had around here yesterday or day before, then you can have some major wetness problems that turn into mold or wash out nutrients. And then how it's stored as well. So all of those things can affect it. Now, reality, when you're purchasing it, a lot of times it depends on price, availability and season, storage capacity, how much can you buy? If you can buy more, you can often get a good price. But if you can't store it, or if you're storing it somewhere where you're going to have a lot of hay waste, then what's your bang for your buck? And the number of horses and the housing situation that you have. And then, of course, myths and history. There's always, you have to know about your hay, you have to know about the storage, and you also need to know about the reputation of the seller. So if you ask around or look up there, there's a lot of actual places where you can look for hay on the internet. You can also find some good, bad, and ugly recommendations for some of these. You get I got 3 bales and 2 of them were moldy. And you're like, okay, you bought 3 bales from a hay dealer. Okay. You might as well go to your feed store and pay a little more and they'll be responsible and make sure they're not giving you bad hay. But, you need to look carefully, and you can actually go evaluate the hay. You can have some sort of agreement that if there's, if you get a squeeze is, I think it was 80 bales, I can't remember, of hay, then, and there's a moldy bale or 2 moldy bales, that's kind of okay. Something got wet or something like that. But if you have 10% of that bad, then that's a problem. And then you need to be talking to your hay guy. A lot of people good hay dealers, if you have that much of an issue, would trade that out. Okay, because they know their reputation depends on providing good hay. So I don't know. That's just some Timothy hay, actually up in Vermont. But that's some Timothy hay that was actually pretty good hay. It doesn't look nearly as bright and green and rich as the alfalfa, but nor did those horses need it. It's funny, the myths and things. If I brought a bale of alfalfa into that barn in Vermont, they say, oh my goodness, that's too rich for our horses and they will never survive and they will die. And that's what I say about the myths and things about that, because out here we feed a lot of alfalfa, and there are some that you have to pay attention, that young horses, making sure they're having adequate nutrition. But alfalfa is a good hay, as is Timothy, as is orchard grass and teff, depending on the individual quality of each. So does that kind of help give you an eye for why you have to be careful?
What's the difference between the Bermuda and like the Timothy as far as nutrition?
I think the Timothy that we had up there had about an 8, depending on who it came from and when, it had about an 8 to 11% protein, whereas alfalfa, it can have about up to 25 if you're feeding it to dairy cows, but like 18 to 20% crude protein. The Bermuda, I think it could be about parallel, but it's often the Bermuda is a lot finer than the Timothy. And the Timothy has the heads of grass. In fact, I think I'm going to hit escape and see if I can get out of here, because let's see if I have it on there. Let me go somewhere. I have I have Google Images, because I was going to show you some hay, because I knew. There we go. All right, so if we let's just go Bermuda. This is just Google Images. Okay, see how fine that is? When you look at that, and you know, when you've pulled it, it comes apart, or sometimes it falls apart while you're trying to carry a flake and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Now let's go to Timothy. But all of that looks pretty darn good. You can see a little bit yellow in here, but overall, most of that hay looks good. Now let's try Timothy. Okay, so here's Timothy. Here's Timothy grass. Here's some Timothy hay. And so you can see it has a little more body to it, and it has that Timothy head on there as well. And so that's one telltale sign. But the funniest part is when and see, here's some pretty mature Timothy hay. See how big that head is right there? When I was in Washington, I had some hay growers come to me and say, I'm trying to grow some quality hay for these horse people, but these horse people want the heads on the Timothy that big, which is way mature, it's thicker. And so if you look at this picture, there's a little closer look at the Timothy head, and that's a nice size. So he's like, horse people don't believe it's good unless that head is this big. And so they're like saying, I'll pay more, but I want to pay for less quality hay, only they didn't know that's what they were doing.
So kind of the myths you're talking about is we don't really have full understanding, but we kind of put our own impressions or
what somebody told us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then let's look at alfalfa. That's a cool way to find some fast pictures. Okay, so you see how much leafier it looks like in the field itself, and it has the purple flowers there. And then you look at it here, and you can see the hay. You can see a couple of different hay. So here's a close-up look, and you can see the hay there. Now look at those stems, and then look at the next one. See how these are less mature? They're not as thick stems as that previous. Here's the other one. So that's the talking about. This one is more mature than, where'd he go? This guy, okay? You see the difference in that? Does that help? And then this guy, oops, where'd he go? That doesn't look very mature. This is the one I was looking at. Now see that right there? That has some Timothy in there right now. So it says alfalfa, but you can see that guy right there. And then, of course, a 3-strand bale, 3-string bale, $24, about 100 pounds. The Timothy is usually done for horse people, and so it's usually done in the 50-pound bales, 2-string as well. And here's a Timothy alfalfa mix. So anyway, that gives you some. Let's just look at one more. Let's look at teff, and then I'll see. We started just a little bit late, but okay. So look at this teff grass, teff hay for horses. And so you can see it has a lot smaller little flower type things on it. Let's see if this looks. So you can see it has a much different head on it than alfalfa or Timothy. And so some horses apparently have some allergies and they can handle teff, but they can't handle alfalfa or something else. So that's one reason. Now, if you had a really fat horse, you could feed a horse more mature hay because they don't need as much nutrient value, but they do need the roughage. So as long as it's not moldy or bad, you can actually feed it. It'd be like feeding them, oatmeal instead of candy bars. So what questions do you guys have?
I have a comment. It's really interesting. My background is in growing, gardening, I'm not the equine specialist you are, obviously, but there's a lot of connection when we grow food. You learn a lot about plants and how they grow, and you pay attention to the stem size, the leaf, the shape of the leaf. When they mature, all these things you're talking about is what we learn when we grow food and various vegetables. So I'm beginning to understand now how I can take that knowledge and somewhat apply that to the hay. To grasses, right? We're talking about grasses.
Yeah, grass and legume. So grass hay would be like Timothy, teff, or orchard grass or Bermuda grass. Legume is alfalfa or clover, and that legume has a much higher protein and such than the grass hay itself, or pasture for that matter. Did you have a question there? Oops, you're muted. You muted yourself again.
I don't have a question. I would just.
No, I thought that. I'm sorry, Tracy. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Our horse sometimes eats the leaves off the cottonwood. Are they lacking a nutrient that they need?
It may be more of boredom.
Okay.
Yeah, cattle actually are supposedly able to choose the nutrients that there are, minerals and vitamins that they're missing. They've done tests where they put different types of minerals in a long thing, and the cow will apparently go to what they're lacking in. Horses in general haven't been shown to do that as much. A lot of times they're more bored.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's the thing where if you have boredom, you could actually feed a little bit, more mature as a snack, so to speak. Decrease, depending on what your horse's needs are, you can actually have some less nutrient value hay that serves as some filler and entertainment. So he's not eating all of the, eating your trees.
Got ya. What kind of feed do you feed your horses?
So that complete pellet that you saw,
yeah,
that's what my horse gets on one meal. And then he gets alfalfa on the second meal.
Okay.
Yeah. And that way the complete pellet fulfills like those two little graphs I showed. Yes. With the different hay and then the added. By getting the complete there, he's getting his vitamins and minerals that the hay might not cover. And then they have salt blocks too. Okay. But he doesn't work very hard. He's pretty much a pasture ornament right now. And because I work too hard.
Right? A pretty yard art.
Yes, he's very good yard art.
I have a question. Timing of feeding. I learned tonight that horses naturally in their natural state, eat small meals throughout the whole day, rest, and then eat some more. So if you can mimic that, if possible, that's probably the best thing we can do, right?
Well, okay. So you have what you should do and what's reality. So reality is we feed our horses meals, but if we base their diet on forage, that helps right there because they're getting the roughage along with the nutrients and they take longer to eat it. But you should ideally, if your horse is all completely dependent on you and does not have any grazing, which is fine, a lot of horses don't, you should break it into at least 2 meals per day so that they have the time where there's food moving through their system. And if you're feeding, we said at least minimum of 1% of hay per day, but usually, about 1.5 to 2%, that would be what you would bring up into the feeding. So that 20 pounds of hay per day would be broken up at least into 10 pounds in the morning and 10 pounds in the evening. Or if you can do 7, 5, 7, whatever it is, 7, 6, 7 pounds, 3 meals, then that's fine too. And generally you don't want to have more grain ration than hay because that's like feeding them candy bars. So you would have, if you have, say your mare is eating 3% of her body weight because she's feeding that full, you would want at least 2% of that to be hay or forage, and the other percent would be grain, or even 2.5% and then 0.5%. So 30 pounds of feed per day for the mare, at least 20 pounds of hay, if not 20 to 25, and then the rest in grain to meet her needs. Because that's where the forage helps their system work, because they're used to having it food pass through, like I said at the beginning and Susan just mentioned. But other than that, and that's some pretty basic, simple information, but it can actually save you and your horse from some pain and sorrow from feeding moldy hay or feed them too much grain and not enough hay and having them colic, which we'll talk about next time. Other questions?
If you feed the equidine, because we were going to feed the equidine to our 4-year-old, do you feed morning and evening or just one time? Is it better to break it up morning and evening?
Yeah. So if you're feeding
3 times a day out there.
So you said you cannot feed them 3 times a day, or
she is fed 3 times a day,
and that's better. So it's better to have smaller, more frequent meals. But the total, you calculate the total that your horse needs, and then you divide that amount into 2, 3, 4 meals. But they did some studies and they found that when you're feeding meals, if you get 6 meals per day, it's not giving them much better than if they were getting the 3 meals. So 3 meals a day is good.
Okay. When would you feed the equidine?
As long as they're eating it and used to it, you can pretty much intermit it, because it's basically alfalfa hay with some added stuff. So as long as they get it once out of the 3, if that's what you're feeding, once out of the 3 or twice out of the 3, maybe you just kind of, maybe you do the hay at night, because then they'll have longer to chew on it,
Okay.
because they chew the hay slower than they do the pellets.
Yeah.
Now they still have the same value with added nutrients. Does that make sense?
Yes. And then our friends give it to their horse wet. Does it matter wet or dry?
So do they have old horses?
Yes.
Okay. So their teeth are probably a little bit worn, and so they're helping them break it down. You do have to be careful, especially in the summer, that you soak it and give it to them and then remove it, because that can go bad or go sour. Anything, grain or forage that you're breaking down. Even, some people will wet down those alfalfa cubes that I showed you because of sore old teeth, but it can get too hot and or go bad, mold or otherwise. And so don't leave it overnight when we're in the 100-degree weather. Just soak it before enough to soften it so that they can eat it.
Okay.
But if your horse has good teeth, you don't need to wet it at all, it sounds like.
No, you don't have to. A lot of times, that was the first question. What do you say? You say, yeah, they are. They're old. So they're just trying to give a helping hand, or maybe they eat it better. But bottom line is, if your horse has healthy teeth and they're young or young, 18 is young. I think my horse is 18 now. Nowadays, that's still young as long as they have good teeth. So that's some pretty simplistic stuff. I mean, if you've never seen it before, it's a lot of detail, but it kind of helps you understand why you have to really pay attention to what you're feeding your horse, the quality and the quantity and things like that. Anything else? So now you guys can go look at that hay, evaluate it, see if it has good smell, good freshness, doesn't have any weeds, sticks, or other things hanging out of it, or carcasses. Yeah, you can have some pretty bad surprises in the hay bales.
Yeah, I also encourage everyone, if they can, go check out other kinds of hay. Next time you go shopping for it, you go see what other kinds, and just go look at the stems, look at the leaves, with new eyes now that we have some new information of what to look for. The Teft or the Timothy or the Bermuda. We have a lot of alfalfa in the northern part of the state up here, but
yeah. Well, in Washington, they had a lot of Timothy, but they packed it into compact bales and shipped it to Japan for a lot more money than we would pay for it. So that's why they fed a lot of alfalfa in Washington when I was there. they were shipping out all the Timothy for a much more premium price.
Wow,
Yeah.
amazing.
But alfalfa can be great. So can Timothy, so can teff. Just depends on the quality and quantity that you're feeding as well. And that's where the myths and stories come in. Well, hopefully this was a little bit helpful, gave you some insight.
Great. Well, yeah, we really hope you learned something new. I certainly did. I'm still learning a lot about horses myself. So thank you very much, Dr. Greene. Good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Dr. Greene.
You bet. All right. Good night.